Let's start standing. So we'll do, for props today, ball or block. Optional, you can always ditch them if you don't want to use them. We'll start with just a little standing rotation. So just nice, easy, twisting from side to side. Just getting every joint to move. So ankles, knees, hips, waist, shoulders, and then kind of just checking in, little body scan, what's moving, what maybe feels a little bit stiff, and then how's the breath. And we'll just do one more each way. And then bring the feet a little bit closer. Let's do some shoulder rolls. We're gonna roll the shoulders up and back, just connecting in with those scapula, thinking of sliding and retracting down and back. Right, and this movement with like rib cage movement tends to get a little bit convoluted. So just noticing like, okay, how much are my ribs moving versus how much can my shoulder blades move on my rib cage without also moving my ribs? And then let's reverse it. And a lot of times when we have less shoulder range of motion, we'll use our rib cage to kind of make up for that lack of motion. So it's good to kind of cue in here and check in with that. Nice, and we'll take a little side stretch. So let's do a calf stretch at the same time. So we'll bring one leg back, toe forward, and then just kind of square up the hips and notice if you're a little tucked under. See if you can untuck the hips. And then we'll sweep the same arm as the back leg up and over. And we'll do that a couple times. And so the more you kind of press through the front heel and the back leg to get your hip to open up, you find you have like a little more stability. And then like a fun concept is thinking of like if you were gonna lift your own shirt when you come into this side stretch. So it's really this whole side body that's gonna lengthen like that fascia all the way from your hip. And then we'll switch sides here. So same, but different, right? And you can obviously adjust the depth of your stance. If you're feeling tighter on one side, maybe you bump it in a little bit. So pressing through that front heel, and we're gonna sweep the same arm as the back leg. Getting a little bit of asymmetry, starting to turn the glutes on. Here's a good spot to check in and notice if ribs are popping here. And then seeing if you can really get that stretch from all the way from the hip up through the side body. Take like 2 more on this side. So while we're balancing, it's like a baby balance, right? Are you still breathing? It's like the first thing to go. Nice. Okay, and then since we'll play with kind of inner thigh and outer hip, just play with this concept. So if you got karate chops at the front of your hip crease, right? This is like our forward fold in yoga. I'm keeping my spine flat. So the only place that's folding is my hip joint. And then I'm pushing to come back up. So if you think about your pubic bone and like your PSIS, I'm pivoting at my pelvis. And then I'm just pushing to come back up. So as a concept, right, just moving from the hip joint only. And if your knees or your ankles bend a little bit, that's okay. But we just want to make sure that we're not kind of bending at the waist. So it's the hip joint that bends. And so we'll play with this, a little glute work. So you can break at your hip joint. You're going to allow your knees to bend a little bit. And I just want to make sure my spine's really flat. So this is like our chair pose in yoga, right? It's got a little bit more weight in my heels. I'm going to shift my weight to the left and shift my weight to the right. And just see if as you shift, can you keep your spine really vertical? So instead of kind of like a lean or a twist, this whole piece is just moving over that supporting leg. And it should feel like more outer hip and inner thigh. And you can cue into this a little bit. And if you're not sure yet, shift over to the left side. Check in with the pelvis to notice if you've tucked or if your spine's flexed. And take a couple taps back. You can always hold onto a wall or a foam roller. We're just looking to keep that supporting inner thigh, outer hip really stable. And so those two work together, make sense, right? Outside and inside to balance our thigh in our hip socket. Try one more like this. And then come on up. Do you feel a little bit of work through the hip and the inner thigh? So then break again, little shift. We'll just take a couple shifts from side to side again. So I should feel like a little more weight in my heel. It's like a pressing motion versus toes wanting to grip. And then the next time I'm over my right leg, so we'll do the other side, I'm I'm gonna pause. I'm gonna stabilize through inner thigh, outer hip. Here's my hip crease. I'm gonna take my taps back. And so what we'll usually do, right, because it's a bit of work, is we'll start to tuck the pelvis to avoid it. And you might start to feel it in your knees or your shins. So the more you can kind of find this crease, tactile feedback is always awesome, inner thigh, outer hip, as you tap. Let's try 2 more like this. And then you can take a little rest. Do we feel some work in the hip and the inner thigh? So now we'll try 1 more variation, just to kind of bring that in. So you can stand on your block. Obviously, you could do this without the block. It just makes it a little bit more exciting. You have like a squishy mat. Let's go back to the left leg. So we're gonna stand on this block. We're gonna reach this leg out to the side and bring it back in. And so same, but different. Inner thigh, outer hip are stabilizing, and I'm moving at my hip joint. And so there's an obvious kind of stopping point, right? We do this lying on the ground in our side leg series. It's easier to see, I think, standing sometimes when we're doing like a hip hike or when we're leaning. And our bodies are pretty smart. So if I can just throw my shoulder out, it's like, oh, no work. That's great. So like use it when you have to, but think of pushing through your supporting leg so you're really grounding down. And it's the same muscles you'd use for a jump. Sometimes our nervous system does the opposite, where it will kind of grip and claw. And we end up like kind of clawing with our toes and really working around the knee. The shin feels like it's working a lot. Calf work is great. You'll have a little ankle stability for sure. But we want to feel like the hip joint is doing a lot of the work. The inner thigh, outer. I'm gonna try some circles. We feel some work through the leg. And especially the calf when we're on a yoga block. So if the calf's like, okay, I need a break, you can always step down and then try circling the other way. And then notice if you're starting to kind of like get into body's fatiguing and just refresh that. So it's also a lot of oblique work. So our obliques are anti-rotational. And then take a little rest. You can shake that foot out. And you could do foam roller, you could hold onto a wall. So we'll try the other side. So again, think about the same. So I'm pushing, I've got outer hip, inner thigh, hips are square, and I'm just gonna reach out to the side. And it's visually kind of an illusion, right? It feels like it should be moving from our waist, but actually if we find our hip bones, it's below that. So it's like way down here, kind of at the side where like a swimsuit line would be. And check in with the breath. Again, kind of noticing like, is that the first thing that goes when we're thinking about balance? And then try some circles to kind of refresh that tall verticality. So I'm pushing down to lift up. Nice. So when we talk about like an active straight leg, this is an active straight leg. So your leg is straight, right? It has to be straight to take us out of this kind of flexor tuck system, but it's also not locked. We wouldn't be able to really balance if we were locking without probably gripping with our toes. Let's try the other direction. And usually one side feels easier than the other, more coordinated at least. And if, yeah, like the working leg, I guess they're both working. The gesture leg. Yeah, then take a little rest here. Whee! So you feel some legs, right? So all the stuff we do on the mat is fundamentally comes back to standing. So you can take that yoga block again, and let's do a couple roll downs. So a fun thing to practice is squeezing your block with your glutes. So you feel your outer hip turn on too. And we just wanna make sure it's not a tuck glute squeeze, but my pelvis is staying relatively neutral. So pubic bone and tailbone's pointing down. And then I'm finding my glutes. So here's my outer hip. Can I keep that energy as I roll down? So kind of different spinal pattern, but same energy through the legs. And then can I push and squeeze that block and feel my outer hips and inner thighs kind of assisting as I come back up? Yeah, just take a couple like that. It should feel like you can keep the weight pretty even. So when we lose the squeeze, we might find that we lock our knees a little bit. Maybe our weight shifts back. But if we can squeeze towards midline, should keep us relatively even through the surface area of the foot. Let's do 2 more like this. Yeah, and if you lose it a little at the bottom, you can just shift the weight forward a bit, find that squeeze, relaxing the back of the neck. And we'll do just 1 more like this. So we'll stay down on this next one. You can take the block or the ball out. And then just bend one knee, let the opposite hip kind of drop out to the side and switch. We'll take a couple of these little shifts here, and you can kind of let all form kind of go out the window for a moment. So it's quite a bit of active work through the legs. Just try one more each way, a little body scan here. And then carefully coming down to hands and knees. If you want to grab a kneeling pad or flip your mat or anything, you can. We're just going to take a couple rounds of cat-cow here. So wrists under shoulders, knees under hips. You're going to scoop the abs, just rounding the spine, pushing out of the ground. And then extending and opening up the chest. Let's go for 2 more rounds like this. So we're just kind of moving in the spine, checking out where everything is today. Can your core initiate the movement? So if low back is trying to kind of overemphasize the curl in either direction, see if core can support it a bit more. And then come to neutral. So block or ball, whichever one. You can pop it in between your thighs again. So I'm gonna push out of my arms. So I'm already kind of pressing out of the ground with my arms, like I'm doing a plank. I'm gonna tuck my toes. I'm gonna squeeze the block. So I should find my outer hip and inner thighs again, really pushing out of the arms. See if you can keep that pressure, pushing so much, squeezing that block that you can just float the knees up. So pushing a little bit of weight into the toes. Keep squeezing that block. We'll hold for 5, keeping the neck nice and long. 4, 3, 2, 1, and then lowering back down with control. Nice, we're gonna do that again. So inner thighs, outer hips, really pushing out of the ground. Squeeze, get the whole team ready. So when I shift my weight back, everything's already on and engaged. And I'm just gonna float the knees up, trying to keep my tailbone nice and long. So inner thighs, outer hips support that neutral pelvic position. And 3, 2, and 1. Nice, and the lower back down. Take that block out. So you got lots of feeling in the outer hips, right? You can definitely sense those guys working. So see if you can keep the outer hip on as you take your bird dog. So opposite arm and leg, you can always just keep the limbs down, or you can float them up, and we'll just exchange sides. Hold for like a beat. So just kind of finding that stability. Limbs arrive at the same time in both directions. And can you cue into the outer hip of your supporting leg? Yeah, really nice. Again, so our bodies are pretty smart, so they'll go like, how can I do the least amount of work? And so a lot of times our hip goes whoop out to the side. So here's that outer hip, inner thigh, tracking that thigh right to center. Yeah, nice. Lovely. Try one more each way here. Toes can be tucked or long. It's kind of whatever's most comfortable. Just check in with the neck. And then let's give our arms a little bit of a rest. So we'll come down onto our right forearm. Left hand's gonna stay up here. I'm gonna reach my left leg back, and it's okay if it turns out. I'm just sweeping it up, trying to push out of my supporting limbs. I'm gonna tap it down. I'm gonna float it up, and then I'm gonna bring it in towards my elbow. And then lengthening back, tapping down, floating it up, bring it in towards the elbow. We'll just do that 2 more times. So sweeping back. How's that supporting hip? So if you notice you're starting to side bend to the right, see if you can stay nice and long through that whole side. Last time here, floating up. Knee in, lengthening out, tapping down. Nice. And so you can come onto both forearms, tuck your back toe, and just take a little stretch through the calf. I'm just pushing with the arms, getting a nice little calf stretch here. Take one more little press back. And then we'll switch to the other side. So you can bring your knee in, your elbow's already set up. You can come back up to your right hand here. So finding pretty square to start. I'm gonna sweep that back leg up. Don't worry if it turns out a little bit. I'm gonna tap down, float it up again, and then bring that knee as close as I can to my elbow. So lots of oblique work here. Definitely some shoulder work. And obliques play a lot. We'll do 2 more like this into our balance. Last one here, just checking in with your heads. If you notice it's starting to droop, kind of gazing between like elbow and thumb. And then we'll come all the way down. Let's cross our ankles here. And we'll do a little ab work. So yoga or block in between the thighs. You could also obviously do it without. We want a little more inner thigh excitement. So you can have your feet down, you can have your feet flexed. We're just looking for whatever gets you as tall as possible on your sits bones. We'll start with hands on the thighs. So you got a little bit of nervous system feedback. So I'm squeezing the block or the ball. I'm gonna roll back off my sits bones until my arms are extended. And then kind of pause here. Can you curl to keep that C shape to come back up, and you're gonna roll back over your sits bones. So I'm trying to kind of find that moment where I'm stacked again. Restack that spine, little register here, and then come back down. Love an exhale for this one just because helps coordinate, right? Kind of natural compression. Good reminder to squeeze the block each time. And in a fun way, it should feel like the more you squeeze the block, the more core work it is. So it's like kind of a nice little cycle of torture. Like, more assistance to come up and more ab work. Just what I wanted. And if this feels good, maybe try hands just lightly on your shoulders. And this is a good reminder to bring your shoulders with you. So we will have a little bit of flexion through the shoulders, through a little bit of protraction. So I don't have to be perfectly straight and round. That's pretty challenging. So there's like a natural bit that happens. Sometimes we leave our arms back in space. So this is a good little tactile reminder to, oh yeah, my shoulders are gonna come with me. And your neck will usually feel a little bit better here too. Keeping the gaze forward, right? We'll turn our head from side to side. Okay, I'll make it more exciting now. So we'll roll back and stay, maybe not as low as you've gone. You're gonna reach the arms forward. Keep that squeeze. I'm gonna twist just my sternum. And so rotating at the waist, take a breath through center, and then exhale to rotate. And so the inner thigh squeeze should give you some good feedback when there's a shift that wants to happen. And again, our body likes to offload. So if I'm gonna twist to the right, I might notice I shift my weight to the left. So try keeping your weight just as much on the left hip as you go to the left as the right. And you might actually find you get like a little bit more rotation. So if I shift away, I lose some rotation. But if I can squeeze and still weight that right side, I can eke out just like a tiny bit more. Kind of a fun thing to practice. Try one more each way. Nice. Yeah, and then you can come all the way up. Let's do just one more little ab torture piece. So we'll roll back down. Anti-rotational. So easy, so great. Just open one arm out and then bring it back in. Yeah, nice. And it's giving that permission for the shoulder blade to move. So try to keep those knees even, pelvis even. Can my shoulder blade slide towards my spine without anything else rotating? Yeah, and sometimes ribs or chin want to get involved. Let's just do one more each way. Squeeze even more at the end range. I'm like really working the inner thighs when it's the furthest out. Maybe I can go just like a little bit more. Yeah, nice. You can roll all the way down. And then pull your feet a little bit closer here. So we'll do just a couple shoulder bridge. If you can, palms up, maybe arms to the ceiling is a nice variation. And let's just go for like 4 hip rolls. So I'm using my abdominals to scoop, pressing through my heels, opening the front of my hips. Nice breath in at the top. We're just watching we don't go too far in the upper body, and then melting the spine back down. So lots of deep core for more articulation in our shoulder bridge. Glutes and hamstrings will kind of turn on as you float up. And just easy breath here, a little body scan, like what is tensing or assisting, or toes wanting to claw. And we'll just do one more like this. Getting a little extension through those hips. You can bring your arms out to a T, and then we're gonna come into our imprint position. So ribs are drawing towards hips, right? That low back position. I'm gonna lift my heels and squeeze the block. You should feel some bum and hamstring and inner thigh turn on. We're gonna drag the toes towards the bum and then float the legs to tabletop. You could always keep your toes on the ground for a little bit easier version. We're gonna do a little twist. So as I twist, I allow the top hip to lift. And then I'm only gonna go as far as the opposite shoulder stays on the ground. Take a breath in here. Can your inner thighs and your outer hip and low core draw the legs back in? I'm just moving at your own tempo here. So it's my lift from my inner thigh, squeezing. You should feel some bum and hamstring and also outer hip happening. And just notice if you feel like you're going so far that you're kind of wrenching in the low back, just keep the range a little bit smaller. If you want to make this harder, you can always extend the legs out. A little longer lever there. We'll try one more each way. Using that exhale. Okay, then either keeping the legs in tabletop or you can set the legs down. We're gonna bring the hands behind the back here, or the back of the head. And then you're gonna nod the chin. We're gonna come up into a little crunch, exhaling, and then lengthening back down. So just keeping the imprint. So obviously it's a little bit more of a challenge in the low core if you've got the legs up. So you can always lower the legs. You could also extend the legs out a little bit further on the diagonal if you wanna turn it up a bit. Nodding that chin first before we use the mid-back to lift up. And then think of your crunch like your floating ribs are just sliding towards your pubic bone. And you can take advantage of the last 4 that we're gonna do here by lowering more slowly. So if I curl up in 1 count, can I lengthen back without losing my imprint? So I'm gonna try to create, instead of just compressing and dropping, I'm gonna try to create length between my hips and my armpits. I've got just 2 more here. And last one. Nice, then you can hug your legs into your chest. Take a couple little rocks from side to side. So we'll get rid of the block. You could use your block. If you've got a stability ball, this is gonna be a little comfier. We're gonna roll to the side and we're gonna do a little hip movement. So I'm gonna pop that ball in between. I like to kind of go just like above my ankle because my shin just holds the ball better, but you could also go foot if that's better for you. It's like whatever works the best so that your feet aren't trying to hold the ball in a sickle, but you can stay pretty flexed. We're gonna come all the way down. Nice, we're gonna start with just a little squeeze with the top leg. So I'm just exhaling, finding outer hip and inner thigh, and I'm squeezing that ball with my top leg. So it's not really moving a lot, but you are getting a little bit of instability with that squeeze. And I'm just making sure, right, hips are square, ribs, shoulders, a little bit of bottom oblique action happening if the top side wants to ride. Right, more support is hands down, less support, just arm off. So on the next one, we're gonna keep the squeeze. We're gonna lift both legs off. A little hover, and then lower back down. Easy exhale, so you're still breaking at that same spot in your hip joint, so right where that like swimsuit line would be. You can always pad the hip if it doesn't feel super comfy. Folding the mat is a good strategy. And can you keep the feet easy? So can you reach through the heels and really get your glutes and your inner thighs on? So if our knees are bending, that tells us something else is working. So our inner thigh, outer hip, so really get that inner quad on. Let's do one more like this. Nice, okay, you can let that ball fall in front of your foot. We're gonna take the top leg up and we're gonna do some rainbows. So I'm gonna rotate and tap my toes forward over the ball. And then I'm gonna float my leg up and I'm gonna rotate and tap my heel behind. So just, hip-ish height. We just wanna make sure that when we come up and over, it isn't a dip here in the waist, but again, it's that crease is where the action's happening. And it's okay if you can't actually tap, just go for a rotation from the thigh. Yeah, nice. One is usually harder than the other, so fun to kind of research here. Let's go one more each way. Yeah, nice. Take a little rest for a moment. Do we feel some work in the outer hip? Yay. Okay, ab break. So you can keep the ball where it is. You can either squeeze the ball together at your feet, or you can place your heels on top of the ball and squeeze your legs together. we're gonna do a couple full roll-ups. So if my feet are on top of the ball, it's really easy to lock the knees. So squeeze your legs together and find your bum. And then we're gonna sweep the arms overhead. Take a nice breath in. You'll exhale to curl and roll all the way up. Yeah, nice. And you can go for the stretch by all means. Feel free to get a little stretch in there and then we'll roll all the way back down. So again, if it's easy to lock, find that squeeze together. And if you're not ready for full roll up, what could you do? Let's go for 5 more like this. I'm just gonna show another variation. You could do ball between, right? You can assist with the hands. That's your half roll back, which is kind of the integral part of your full roll up. And then I can use momentum and I can grab and squeeze at the same time to come all the way back up. So some good options. Band is always awesome under the feet. So it's like, how can you integrate your hips into your ab work, right? And the more we can get our hips working for us, it's like the less hard ab work becomes because it's got so much assistance from these really big muscle groups. And in theory, our abs are like from our knees to our shoulders anyway. So yeah. Nice, lovely. Ball's kind of fun. It will give you a little feedback if you are tipping or crunching to one side or the other. So in the next one, we'll roll all the way down and we'll rotate to the side for our side glute work. I'm gonna do a full flip so that you can see. And then we'll start on the second side. So again, kind of finding that spot where you feel like your feet aren't gonna do anything too wacky. And then whatever's most comfortable for your head. And we'll start with a little squeeze. So once you're nice and square, it's outer hip, inner thigh, whoo, that squeezes. And if you're feeling it in the back of the knee, right, then that would be like, okay, I'm a little hyperextended, maybe I'm sitting into my lock. You can activate the bottom leg, which hopefully is already a little bit fatigued and awake since you just worked it. It'll give you a little bit more feedback. And then bottom oblique. We've usually got one side that's like a little more coordinated or less coordinated, or one side that fatigues quicker. It's always fun to kind of take notes from how it felt on the side that feels more efficient maybe. Just try 2 more like this, just finding outer hip, inner thigh. And then we'll keep that, and then we'll float the legs up. And remember, you've got some options for your hands. So you could do like hand down if you need a little bit more support. You could do hand on the hip. That's a nice little option to remember. Like, where's this crease coming from? So instead of the waist flexing, you could do arm up, arm overhead. That's kind of a nice challenging one, but a good reminder if you like to crunch through the side of the torso. And you can always pad the hip. And so bottom glute and inner thigh are on just as much as the top one. And just try a couple more like this. Core is definitely engaged, especially if you're feeling it in the low back. And let's do 1 more here. And then you can ditch that ball. So just let it kind of roll in front. You'll use it as sort of a nice marker. We're gonna float the top leg up. We'll turn the leg in to tap forward from the hip and then turn the leg out to tap back. Yeah, so a couple things to kind of look for. If the foot is doing the turn out and turn in, but the thigh is actually just staying parallel. So think of rotating all the way from the hip socket. And if the knee wants to bend at all in either direction, think of finding some length, whether or not you actually touch down. The bent knee is sometimes a sign that we're not getting that extension from our hip. And just easy breath, easy neck, easy jaw. And let's do 1 more set here. So we're feeling some hip. Yeah, nice. And then you can take a little rest. Yay, second side, hips. Okay, well, you can take that ball. If this is too much of a pain in the butt, you can always just do heels together. It's just like a little bit of coordination involved in this. But we're gonna lie on our fronts and we're gonna put the ball in between our heels. So if it's like really frustrating, then just ditch the prop. I feel like that's always a good strategy. So knees will be about mat distance, like your comfortable turnout, and then you're just gonna have your forehead on your hands. So my upper body is not lifting up at all. So what we're gonna do is just squeeze the heels together and you're gonna find your bum activating, right? So Tucky bum is where we're smashing our pubic bone into the ground and trying to tuck our pelvis under. We don't want that bum. So we want a nice melon bum. So we're gonna squeeze the glutes without changing the relationship of the hip and the pubic bone to the ground. So as you squeeze, see if you can find that guy. Right, and a lot of times too, it'll be like, okay, a lot of tension in the low back if we're tucking to get the glutes because we're pulling on the low back. So that's kind of a nice, like, all right, that's a sign that maybe the glute firing isn't quite what we want. And then once you found it, try to float the knees up. So it's gonna be glutes and top of the hamstring right here. And now, of course, there is gonna be some pressure into the pubic bone because you're lifting your thighs up. So don't panic if you feel that. But just check in with the set. So set is bum and then hamstrings to float up. Yeah, really nice. Yeah, lovely. And if this feels okay, you can take it into a little extension, which is pretty brutal, and then lower the legs down and then bend again. So I'm gonna float the legs up, glute hammies contract, and then lengthening, and then lower down. You can point the feet, you can flex the feet, you can let the feet do nothing at all. Try 2 more of whichever variation you are sticking with here. And last one, make sure the abs are still on. And then you can drop the ball, bring your hands by your side here, and then press back and take a child's pose. And just a couple easy breaths here. Let's go for like 3. You can really push with the arms. So you can get that forehead towards the ground. And then we'll make our way back to hands and knees. So we'll do a little bit more hip work. So for this one, again, you can add the ball for a little bit more excitement, or you can ditch it. But I'm gonna put the ball behind my right knee, and I'm coming back into my quadruped position. And so I'm just gonna do some reaches with that right thigh out to the side. So there's like our classic kind of fire hydrant. And I'm thinking of that left hip staying really stable. So outer hip and inner thigh are stabilizing me as I reach out. And if there was a line drawn from my supporting knee to my lifted knee, it would be nice and flat. So I'm just watching for bringing my knee forward towards my supporting arm, keeping both sides of the waist nice and long. Here's that nice oblique work, so I'm not twisting in my spine. Try one more like this. Then you're gonna sweep the leg back. So now I'm gonna take some little hamstring reaches. Again, supporting through the core so that the low back doesn't arch, lots of shoulder work. If your wrists are getting tired, just kind of check in and notice if you're sitting in the outside edges of your hands and find a little bit of squish through all the finger pads here. Try one more like this. Nice, you can take that ball out. Pop it in between your thighs. We're gonna do a little push-up practice. It's like all these baby push-ups. So you can just do it in your hands and knees position. You don't have to go into a full plank, which is nice. Find your shoulder blade retraction. So first piece in my push-up is I have to allow my shoulder blades to slide together ever so slightly. So that's kind of initiating the motion. Another piece is if my hands are really narrow, it might feel really hard to do it. So don't feel like you have to go the length of the mat. So I'm taking a little retraction. My elbows are bending kind of in that 45-degree plane. If my elbows bend out to the side, I'm much more likely to come into internal rotation in my shoulders. And so you can keep the weight in your hips. So really use your outer hips, your inner thighs. You're gonna let the retraction happen. Little elbow bend, spine comes down, nice breath in, and then exhale to push back up. And the more you can connect through your finger pads, the better. Yeah, and if you wanted to up this, obviously, you could take it to your kneeling plank if that's good, whether your legs are down or up, and find that retraction. Or you could take it into your full plank if you wanted a little bit more. So you have a couple options here. But that first piece of letting your shoulder blades participate. And if you're taking it into your bigger plank position, can you keep the squeeze so that your outer hips are really active here too? Yeah. You're just watching the head. And then you can take a little rest for a moment and we'll switch sides. So take that ball and pop it underneath our left knee. Hopefully arms are feeling like, okay, they're stabilizing. If they're starting to get tired, this is kind of a common thing, is we'll start to spin into internal rotation. If you think about, you have two jars, you're gonna screw the jar lids away from one another. You wanna keep the triceps active. And so we'll just start with a little fire hydrant on this side. Yeah, nice. And so just keeping an eye on if supporting hip wants to offset, can it be a pusher? And you might even find, right, you don't even really need the right hand very much. Whatever your supporting leg is, you got a little bit more weight in that opposing shoulder. And then pause here, let's go up to the ceiling. So swooping up without letting the back arch. Noticing if we're starting to collapse to one side or if the elbows are wanting to bend as we get tired. Yeah, easy breath here. 2 more. Nice, and then you can take that ball out. We'll sit on our bum here. We'll do a little bit more ab work. So for this one, we'll take the ball and we'll pop it behind our low spine. So if you were to kind of come into that little half roll back, that's kind of the position that we want. So we just want the ball to be like kind of under there enough that it's giving us a little bit of support, but we already feel like we're sort of working. The challenge here is not to go into an arch, but to stay curled in the upper abs. And so while we're here, we're just gonna do like a nice isometric hold, and we're gonna do some arm scissors. And just breathing, and again, so it's like as I allow the shoulder blade to open, I have to work the obliques so much more to not also let the rib cage open. So it's that separation. And then keeping the neck nice and easy, because our chin and our neck sometimes wanna get involved a little bit. And we'll do 1 more each way. Okay, so you can take a little rest for a moment. Then we're gonna do some deep hip. So we'll come back into that same position. Nice easy scoop. Adjust that ball if you need. We're gonna go hands behind the thighs. So version 1 is I'm assisting as I lift. And so you wanna make sure that you're not arching away from the ball. And if the ball's a little too close, obviously you can adjust it, but you wanna feel like your spine is connected in the exact same, we'll alternate legs here. Spine is in the same place on the ball. And maybe we go to no hands, right? So tons of deep hip and core to keep from popping the low back or the ribs forward. And if you want to make it even more exciting, you can stay up and then tap down, right? But it's all about, if you start to go into the arch, then it's like, okay, we know we've sort of lost that position. And you might have to make an adjustment with the ball when you're going both legs up, just because it's a little different positionally. I'll do 1 more each way. And then we'll come all the way forward. You can take a little butterfly here. We'll grab the ankles and we're just gonna do a little protraction, retraction stretch. So rolling back off of your sits bones, you can look towards your belly button and let your shoulder blades stretch. And then you can draw your chest forward and extend your sternum. Yeah, maybe bending your elbows. And we'll do that just like 2 or 3 more times, moving with your breath. And a nice little back stretch here. Last one. Nice. Okay, more abs. So we'll bring the ball back a little further. Let's go right behind the shoulder blades. I'm gonna give it a little tap here. And we'll clasp our hands the way that feels a bit odd behind the back of our neck. And then keeping your pelvis neutral. So pelvis and low back aren't going to change positions. We're going to come into a little extension. So lengthening over the ball. Nice easy breath in, nodding the chin, exhaling, and then imagine you're just gonna barely come up off the ball. You're not actually going to. It's like tiny little F weight, and then you can lie back down. So we're going from extension through neutral to flexion. And what's tricky about this one is it's really easy to overarch in the low back. So kind of popping the ribs and overarching when we go back, and then really smashing the back when we curl up. So it's like, can I keep the same stability in the pelvis while my ribs are moving in extension and flexion? Just kind of gazing towards the knees. And if you don't have the ball, block's probably not super comfortable, so you could just do your crunches here in neutral, which is always tricky. We'll just do one more like this. Okay, then we'll pause in neutral. So I'm like a little bit curled up in my ribs, like baby crunch kind of, but neutral in the pelvis. We're gonna do a little side to side. So keeping my hips really stable, outer hip, inner thigh. I'm gonna bring my right elbow towards my right hip, and I'm gonna lengthen my left elbow up, stretching that left side out, come back to center, and then try the other side. So there's this tricky element of I have to almost weight the side that's lengthening, so that opposite hip of the direction that I'm bending. You might find a little bit of like energy through the heel. So as I said, bend to the right, it's left tailbone to left heel. And we'll try one more set each way. It should feel kind of like a nice stretch, but also a bit of ab work just to support. Then we're gonna mix it up. So coming back to, again, that kind of neutral position. This time we're gonna rotate. So I'm gonna let my chest rotate to the right. So I'm like pressing my right rib into the ball to bring my left rib over. And then I'm gonna come back up, pass through center, press your left rib into the ball as you turn to look to the left. And just trying to keep the hips really stable. So again, another example of how can I get my pelvis to kind of participate, my hips to participate in my ab work for some stability. And we'll just do one more each way. This one's always a little tricky. Finding that length on the top side without barn dooring. Nice, you can come back to center. If it feels good to lengthen over the ball, you're more than welcome to. If it doesn't, you can just roll to the side. And then we'll leave this guy for a moment. We're gonna do a little oblique excitement. So you could keep your head down for this whole first part if you would like. We're gonna come into a bicycle. So you're gonna come into your imprint position. And so flat back, I've got my obliques drawing my ribs and hips together, pubic bone rotated towards my spine. You're gonna float one leg at a time to tabletop. And then we're gonna go into a little bicycle. So if you wanna keep your head up or down, it's just gonna stay. So you can come up into your little crunch here, and then we'll take our bicycle. So extending one leg at a time, in and out, right? The lower you go, the more you can cue into your glutes. The higher it's gonna be a little closer, so a little more supportive, a little more hip flexor. You can kind of feel the difference if you play between the two. Then we'll take 2 more sets, alternating here. And then pause when your right leg is bent and your left leg is long. So this is version 1. If you want more support, set your left foot down, but keep your right leg bent. We're gonna take a breath in. You're gonna exhale to curl up, and your left elbow is gonna touch your right thigh and then roll back down. All right, so it's kind of version 1. We're gonna do 5 more of these. Version 2 is the leg up, and you can choose your height. Exhaling to twist. Nice, 3 more. You just wanna make sure that you're not leaning on your right elbow. So I'm gonna curl up into my crunch and twist without letting, you got 2 more, without letting that elbow rest on the ground. Last one. And then you can hug your legs into your chest here. We'll take a little twist before we go to the other side. So you can let your legs just fall over to the right. Sweep that left arm in opposition. If you want a little more stretch here, you can lengthen that bottom leg long. And we'll say take about 3 or 4 breaths in this guy. Feel free to keep it moving if you want to explore with that arm. Maybe try a bent 90-degree elbow position. Maybe just turning the neck from side to side, little skull massage. And so we'll roll back onto our back here. So for part 2, before we go into the obliques, we're gonna do a little scissor. So again, you can have your arms down. You can grab your legs and scissor. You can also be head down or head up. So we've got a couple options here. So we'll start with our imprint position. And then we're gonna float both legs one at a time to tabletop. So either coming up into your crunch or keeping your head down, we're gonna kick the right leg out, left leg comes towards us, and we can switch. So if you want more of a stretchy version, this is really nice because you can really reach that bottom leg away. If you want more of like an ab challenge version, right, a little more hip, gonna keep an eye on how these legs are tracking. So if you notice that there's a bit of like a swing out to the side or a rotation, see if you can minimize that. So there's your oblique work. And then just noticing if the neck starts to overwork a little bit so you can keep it in the abs. And we'll just do 2 more sets here. So in the last set, we'll bend the left leg. We'll cross the hands behind the head, right leg reaching long. You get 6 of these. So you're gonna exhale to curl up, bring that right elbow to the left thigh, and then lower back down, right? And here's your other version if you wanna put that right foot down if you're noticing you're getting a little fatigued, forms going somewhere else. As you curl, see if you can keep that left elbow from coming down to rest on the ground. If my calculations are correct, I think this is our last one. And then you can rest, pulling your legs again into your chest. We'll take that twist on the opposite side. So letting the legs fall to the left, you can sweep the right arm out. A couple options here, right? Play with the arm position if you want to lengthen that bottom leg long, if that feels good. You can make this really active and just kind of play with the arm in space. So you can find some nice breath into the side body. We'll go for about 3 more breaths here. Maybe turning the head from side to side if that feels comfortable. And then gently bending that leg, we'll roll back onto our back here. If you have your ball and you want to add this for a little fun with shoulder bridge, we're going to put our feet on the ball. So typically, we'll kind of start to notice the ball might want to move away. So see if you can start with the ball pretty close and think of drawing your inner thighs together, but also pulling your heels to your bum. And we'll take a nice breath in here. We're just gonna exhale to lift. So easy breath in at the top and then lowering back down. And you'll notice you might not get as high in your extension as you lift. We're kind of making this a little more challenging with the legs together and the unstable surface. Lower hamstrings like to chat a bit. Don't worry about articulation. We're just lifting and lowering in one piece. I'm gonna do 1 more like this. Okay, so on this next one, we will go not quite as high. So think just a couple inches off the ground versus your full shoulder bridge. You can have the hands down for support, maybe elbows or no arms for a little bit more challenge. We're gonna float up and then we're gonna butterfly the legs out. So here's outer hip activating and then inner thighs are gonna pull back in. So if the ribs pop, we're gonna lose that oblique component. So if you can really find core, ribs and hips joined together, kind of think your imprint position, and then find the glutes and hamstrings, outer hips, inner thighs. We'll take just a couple more like this. Let's go for 3. Checking in with the breath. Last 2. Nice, last one. And then you can bend, or rather lower your hips down. You can bend and straighten your legs here. So you can kind of roll up and down the ball, give your hamstrings a little break. And then we'll take the ball, we're gonna flip onto our belly, and we're gonna use the ball for a little extension. So for this one, if it doesn't feel great, you can always, like a foam roller could be a good substitute for this. If you don't have a ball, you can also ditch the ball and just go hands wider. So I'm gonna have my hands in my prayer emoji, and I like to go a little bit lower, so I'm not necessarily on the edge of my hand, but I'm a little bit more like wrist forearm for myself. It's a little more comfortable. I'm gonna start with my arms extended, glutes are on, so I'm pressing down through the tops of my feet and my abs are on, and I'm just gonna do shoulder extension or shoulder protraction and retraction, and upward rotation and downward rotation. So as I push the ball away, right, my shoulders, they protract, upward rotation, and then as I draw the ball towards me, they're gonna retract, so a little downward rotation. So I'm not really even extending my spine yet. I'm just noticing, okay, can I move my shoulder blades? Hopefully. And is it my elbows that are doing the motion? So are my elbows kind of initiating? Can I do it from my middle back? That one gets a little bit trickier. So kind of put your brain in your upper back here as the initiator versus the elbow bend. And so if that's feeling okay, you can start to extend it. So I'm gonna press down into the ball as I draw my shoulder blades back, and then I can lift my chest towards the ball, right? Low ribs can stay down. So here's kind of building that strength and stretch without bending the elbows, and then I'm gonna lengthen back down. And so much like your plank work, I have to be able to support it from here first to support my elbow joint. So pressing down into the ball will help. If I want to take this bigger, I can open my legs out a little bit wider. So kind of like a shoulder distant mat distance. And I can press it down and take it into my full swan dive if you're ready. And then lengthening all the way back down. Yeah, and so just taking it to the place where you feel like, okay, I really can work from the shoulders and I can support the elbow joint. And we'll take maybe like 3 more of this variation. Yeah, so chest first, lifting, definitely feels like some upper back. And then your last one here, shoulders plugged towards my spine. And then you can lengthen back down here, bring your hands by your sides and take a child's pose. While you're child's posing, I'll just kind of show a little thingy. Extension is tricky, and sometimes with the extension, especially when we're doing a lot of force, we lock down. So I'm like pulling my shoulders down and I'm kind of locking into my sides and my lats, which can a lot of times affect the neck, right? Because we're kind of pulling on it, but it can make our elbows want to bend. So we want to think of moving back. So the idea is that, and you can even do it seated, that my arms are staying in space about between like the bottom of my shoulder blades, kind of in the top of my back. They're moving in that zone when I'm doing extension and retraction versus locking down. So if you're extending on the mat, and you can even play with, hands by your side as a strategy too. If I lock down, I limit a lot of my movement because I'm compressing my spine, versus if I can find retraction up and back, I get a little bit more movement out of it. So it's definitely harder when we change planes, but that's kind of a nice thing to think about. Let's take a little good speech. Let's take a little lateral stretch here. So you can sweep your hands to the right and then shift your hips to the left here. If your head doesn't touch down, this is a great spot for like using your block. You could rest your head on your block. You could use your hand. And then sweeping your hands to the opposite direction. Letting that hip shift out to the side. You could do head on your hand. And come to center for one more breath. You can start to walk yourself up. Let's do a little side or glute stretch before we end. So one leg is bent and you're just gonna hook the opposite foot over that thigh. And then if you notice that your cheek is up, see if you can sink that hip bone down, and you can always kind of adjust and pull this guy in. So the more you can weight to this side, you can draw your leg in as you press your tailbone down, and it should be like a nice stretch through the side of the hip there. You could always add the twist if that appeals to you. I find just the leg piece for me is like, all right. But if the twist adds a little bit, feel free to add that in. And then just gently releasing that here, and we'll just switch sides. So letting the opposite leg come in and then hook that foot. And then you just want to make sure, okay, my cheek's heavy on that side. You can pull that foot in and then pulling the leg into the chest while you press that hip back down. So it's kind of that counter action that's going to get you the nice outer hip stretch. And just take a couple more breaths like this. Nice, and I'll leave you guys there. Thanks for coming.